call to order the Budget and Personnel Committee meeting, Town of Chincoteague, September 14th, 2021 at 5 p.m. And public comment, I don't believe there is any, is there?
No, sir.
No public comment. So now I'll call for a adoption of the agenda, and just with one change, we're taking out the closed meeting, number 9 and number 10. So we do not need to do that.
So move with the changes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then discussion of EMS supervisor position. As you all remember, at the last meeting, we approved this position. Mike's got the skinny on it now, so I'll turn that over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, Budget and Personnel approved it, and the full council approved it at the last meeting. Approved an extra additional part-time hours, EMS hours, as well as a full-time supervisor for EMS. The object here was to, and I have Mr. Rush here in case I mess up, but the object was to be able to staff 2 ambulances, fully staff 2 ambulances for 300 days a year. Those are not 300 consecutive days, but Brian will staff them when it's most advantageous to have 2 ambulances staffed. It will not necessarily be every day, but it will be 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Brian's calculations say that we need an extra 2,988 part-time hours. He feels that those hours can be filled by the part-timers that we have on staff currently. And also, in order to be as efficient as possible, the new supervisor that we will hire will fulfill, of those 2,988 hours, will fulfill 964 of those hours himself or herself, which reduces the additional part-time hours down to 2,024 and gives us the most bang for the buck for our new position. If you look down at the table, the current costs, or our projected costs, are there. We project that the overall, with the supervisor and additional hours, total annual cost will be $117,464 additional for the fiscal year. Of course, that is not budgeted for this year. So we will have to make an assumption of revenue. We'll have to have a budget amendment because it's an additional expense. We will have to have an increase in revenue or likewise decrease in expenses to account for the additional money. And other than that, if there are any questions on that subject, I'm here, Brian's here, and we can answer any of those for you this evening.
Just so I'm clear, Brian, you can sit down, you don't have to get up, it's fine. Just so I'm clear, your supervisor will be available to run calls as needed.
It'll be a working supervisor, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right, any other discussion on that? No, we're clear on that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 5, discussion of Washington Police Department salary and staffing levels. If you remember at the last meeting, we had kind of charged the staff with coming up with, we realized there may be some discrepancy in our salary levels. We wanted to tackle that before we worked on the additional personnel and to try to get the salary levels correct. So I will turn this over to Mike. We've got a lot of information that everybody here has seen in their packet. So he's going to give us a broad overview without, getting into the weeds on some of the details and so forth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Captain Greenlee and Chief Fisher did a lot of work on this. They have taken a look at the agencies surrounding Chincoteague that we would be in competition with most likely for officers, and found that our starting salary of $31,408 is the lowest in the neighborhood. In fact, the average of the 6 agencies that they studied was about $39,000, which you can see is considerably higher than what we were starting people at. And that's for an untrained officer, meaning someone who has not been to the academy yet. Chief Fisher tells me you can start an officer prior to them going to the academy, but they would be in the very next available academic class if we did that. So, I'm recommending and Chief Fisher and myself and Captain Greenlee have all had long discussions about this and did a couple working meetings. And what I would recommend is that we immediately raise the starting salary for officers from $31,408 to $40,081, and that is for an untrained officer. That equates to $19.27 an hour. That's for an untrained officer prior to going to the academy. Once they got through the academy, we would bump their pay to $19.85, which equates to $41,288 per year. That is the recommendation. That still does not put us at the top of the heap in the neighborhood here for starting salaries. We're about average now, or a little better than average, I should say. The issue with doing that is that it will force us into a thing called compression within the department, in that we're pushing starting salaries with and letting, if we let existing salaries stay where they are, we're pushing new starting folks up against people who have been here quite a while. So in order to relieve the compression, what we would do is I would recommend that there's 4 officers that need an increase in salary to get them adequately separated from a beginner or from a starting salary person. So I would recommend that we also bump the salaries of those 4 officers. The budget impact for that would be less than $20,000, and that's the cost of employment, not the actual increase in salary, but the cost of employment would be an actual little less than $20,000 for the remainder of this fiscal year. And of course, next year we would build this into the budget during our budget work in the early spring.
And that's for the increase for the 4 officers that need it too?
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
included in that 20,
Yes, ma'am.
or less than 20?
Less than 20,000, yes. We also discussed at the last Budget and Personnel Committee meeting, Chief Fisher's request for some additional personnel. And after our discussions, we decided that that discussion would be best held during our budget talks during the early spring. So we'll discuss that again. Again, we've given you a lot of information here. Tyler researched most of this information. It does give you some salaries from competing agencies. And as you can see, we compare favorably or sort of favorably with some of them. However, we are a little bit lower than some. And that is why we're recommending that we take a look at the overall, the entire police department during our budget talks, so that we can get these, get the salaries where they need to be, so that we don't start losing folks to our neighboring agencies.
Could I ask a question? Not only that, losing people to other places, but did you have many applications put in? No. And I'm sure that the nature of the job is playing a factor because of what's going on across the country, but I would imagine also that salaries could play a part in that too, while you're not getting.
Yes, I'm sure. That's part
Right.
of it, but yeah.
Nature
Both, I think
of
both
of
them,
the times that we're in.
So we would be looking to do this now, and then when we go through budget process, we'd evaluate the whole pay scale within the department, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. So I would just need, I guess, a motion on that to do this. I guess how would we need to phrase that motion? It would be
It would be a motion to adopt the town manager's recommendations to increase the starting salary as well as the 4 officers identified in my notes.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. There you go. And then when is that? When are you planning to do that budget discussion on that?
Generally, I'll do a lot of work on the budget over Christmas, during Christmas holiday, because it's rather quiet in the office. My predecessor told me that, he was correct. But I will start probably sometime in late November, early December, getting things lined up and start in earnest on it over the Christmas holiday, so that we could start doing our budget talks in either late January or early February, in hopes that we'd have a budget approved and voted on by maybe the 1st of May.
Okay, that's what you're gaming for.
And I will, as I did last year, publish a budget calendar telling, suggesting what we do on which night, so everybody knows what we're discussing on which night. We'll break it up into sections so it's not too big a bite at one time. Unless unless the council would prefer to do another method, we can do it any way you'd like.
So you all will still continue to evaluate these scales?
Yes.
Yes, because one of the things we think now is that, the study that Tyler was able to get from Acromat, which is, really has been in years past our biggest competitor, that was in 2020.
Yeah,
So
so we're gonna be shooting
in
at
21 now, and
22.
we've understood that they've even got more rigs this year. So,
Okay.
going into 2022, that's what we want to look at also, so.
Plus, didn't the county get a bump from the state?
They got a bonus.
Yeah.
I think deputies and state police got bonuses from the state, to do with the COVID relief. Yes, we were left out of that in the General Assembly.
Go figure.
Yes.
Along with this, Mike, you're gonna be evaluating the salaries for other,
Yes, we are. And you'll notice at the end of this, I gave you a little bit of information at the end of this agenda. It's not listed on the agenda, on the work I've done in public works so far.
okay?
We're still waiting on some information for that. And I've discussed EMS with Brian. We are taking a look at that. Right now, we feel that that's good, but we will evaluate that as well, because as we know, the General Assembly has passed an increase in minimum wage, which we'll have to, which is staring us in the face in a few years, and we probably should go ahead and get started on that. We do have a handful of people that are below that, and we do have some people that are close to that line that probably should be moved ahead.
That would be nice if when we do it, we could do some sort of step increase, knowing going forward, just like the state's done. What the state's is over a 3-year period, I believe, or 5 years, before they reach their final destination.
I think it's 2024, it finally goes to $15, if I'm not
Right.
mistaken. I might be
Right,
wrong.
so it's like 3.5, yeah.
Yeah, instead of doing it all at once.
Yeah, it would be nice to do a step up right along with it, yeah. All right, any other comments on that before we move on? No. Review of transient occupancy tax resolution. That is in our packet. Basically, the thought process is here is that we had talked about this at the last meeting, is allocating the 1% to public safety. And this was a resolution that would kind of firm that up, that we would tonight pass on to the council to pass. And then that would be, give the staff some sort of direction, firm direction on where we're going in the future. So I'll open that up for discussion. I think everybody's seen it in their packet.
I've got an issue with the second line. When I voted for this 1%, I voted on it with the understanding that it was for EMS services and police services, not public works. Fire company stands on its own. But I do not want to see public works in there. I feel like that they've got their own budget and own way of doing things, and if it comes down to busted up sidewalk or something, I know that's public safety, but to me that's maintenance too. And I just don't want to see this money being used for public works projects.
Yeah, I think well, my thought was the intention of it was that if you group it as public safety, I mean, you've got your water department, you've got even possibility of, say there's mosquito-borne illness and we need to do more spraying, that type of stuff. I mean, the public, leaving it broader gives you a little more flexibility. I hate to narrow it down to think that, public safety is only achieved through your police and your EMS. There may be other areas that public safety is needed that's gonna come out of that. I guess public works and general government, Mike, because where's mosquito spraying come out of?
Mosquito spraying, we have, it's a division of public works, but we do have a separate account for mosquito spraying. It's
How
accounted
about
for
water?
separately.
How would water fall in there? Because water's another big public safety issue
Water has, again, is its own fund within general government.
in general government.
But yes, purposely, when I wrote this, and I went back and read minutes of the meetings that concerned this, did word searches and found where it was talked about, and I have listed those minutes. I can, if you don't want to act on this tonight, I can send those out to everyone that's already searched so they could read them. But I tried to get a feel for what was intended for this, and which is why I kept it broad. The vote itself did not state why they were going to use it. It was not specific, let's put it that way. But a bunch of things have been talked about. It was primarily, Councilwoman Baden is right, it was primarily EMS and police. But at one time, Public Works was mentioned. I'm sorry, not Public Works. At one time, Parks were mentioned. And then I believe somebody did mention Public Works at one time. And from what I read, I could not get a clear indication. So I kept it broad, knowing that that the committee could pare it down any way they like. And I know that we don't do fire department, but I thought, just like we're right now buying this SCBA compressor.
Which is gonna come back to ARPA funds, right?
Which is gonna come back to ARPA funds, but I thought, the thought occurred to me that if that was included in there, if we wanted to do something like that in the future, if the resolution would allow the Public Safety Committee, which is the rest of this resolution, it gives the Public Safety Committee the power to say yes or no on the project. It would give them the opportunity to vote on it without having to go back and say, we gotta change the rules. That was my thinking, but of course it can be crafted any way that you all would like.
Yeah, I think it's nice from your standpoint, public safety, because your hands aren't tied so much. Is what you can do, really. That's my thought on it.
Yeah, my thought on the pretty much like Chris's. I mean, it's in the resolution, but it all comes back to the Public Safety Committee to get voted on. So, I mean, they could have a specific need for something that they consider public safety. They still gotta bring it before the committee to get voted on. So I would leave it in there. That way, if they do have something that's public safety that's not covered, that way it would cover it through this.
It'll give you a little more latitude in your
Yeah.
discretionary spending.
Right.
You're not
And
hand tied.
I'll admit that putting the fire department in there was a little bit of a stretch, but I figured that you all would give me direction on what to do with that, if you wanted to leave it in there or not. But that thought occurred to me just because of that piece of equipment we just bought, but it is coming from ARPA funds this time.
And this is kind of clearing up, I mean, we've all heard it, that when they did the first ramifications of the meals tax, we've heard that it was supposed to be used for public safety, and it never really was. So by doing this, we're sort of cleaning up the mess that they made the first time.
Well, I can tell you, going back and reading the minutes from, I think it was 5 different meetings, and I just did council meetings and everything. And going back and reading the minutes, it made me see clearly how important it is for me to get a clear motion when we vote on something, so that I don't spend 4 or 5 hours going back researching something 2 years from now, wondering what we voted on. So I'll try to clean my act up a little bit on that.
Well, it was long before you, well,
Yeah.
I think the only person that was here was probably Miss Ellen. Or were you on council then?
The vote was taken in November, the November 4th meeting of 2019 was the actual vote on this.
Yeah,
On
on
this
this,
1%.
but I'm talking about the first rendition of it.
Yeah, when they initiated it, yeah,
Yeah.
because we sold it to the public,
Right, as a
yeah.
mean to support the
Fire
ambulance and
company,
fire
yeah.
company.
And that's the way I feel about the November 2019. I feel like that we sold it on emergency services and police. And I get fully well what you're saying, you know, a broad spectrum there. Using Miss Ellen's words, I've just got heartburn with it, by,
You're talking about a lot of
Including
money
that.
to tie up into 2 areas. I mean, you're talking, what is it, Mike, real big, probably 200
This year, if we had budgeted this, if this resolution were in effect this year, which it was not, this year we have $1.4 million budgeted for transient occupancy and revenue, so the 20% that we would take off the top of that for public safety would total $280,000.
That's a lot of money
Well,
to narrow down to.
bear in mind that that is, at least some of that we anticipate will be salaries,
Right.
which could consume a sizable chunk. And the rest, I anticipate, and who knows until it actually happens, but I would anticipate the rest is going for things.
I thought we weren't gonna use this for salaries.
Well, the idea is not to, but if you go back again and look at the discussions surrounding the original vote, it was that we need more personnel to cover the more ambulance
Right.
calls and the additional calls that the calls for service that the police department's getting. So it kind of points to me that we need to hire some folks with this.
But when we talked about this last month or the month before, we said we don't wanna tie salaries to this because of the fluctuation of the amount that could be coming in.
Ideally, I agree with you, absolutely. Ideally, it would be wonderful if we did not have to tie salaries to this.
But couldn't we tap into it and use it for like one-time bonuses or?
That, ideally, yes, you would not want to use it for recurring costs, which
Right.
your salaries is the biggest recurring cost you have. So one-time bonuses would not be recurring, it would be yes.
And see, that would be ideal, because I'm assuming you would, extra busy season like this year, bonuses are probably reserved towards the end of the year. Or you would have the money to do so. Yeah. All right. Entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion that we pass this or take this resolution.
To the council, I'll second it, I can second it.
You can second it.
I'll second it. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 I'd have to stand opposed with the Public Works, I'm sorry, I just can't do it.
2 ayes, 1 opposed.
Well, there's 3 of us.
Yeah,
Moving on.
still love
Author,
y'all.
committee member comments and other discussion.
I'm good.
Denise?
Gosh, I didn't think we were there that fast.
Mr. Chairman, there's item 7 we haven't done yet.
Oh, I did miss that one, didn't I? I checked that one off earlier. All right, go back. Cancel that. Number 7, consider fiscal year 2021 budget amendment. I believe this was due to the fact that we had a income that came in on the very last day of last year with some ARPA. So that kind of messed up our last year's budget, and I'll let Mike delve into this as much as he desires. It's kind of a boilerplate type deal.
We have a handful of items here that need to be cleaned up, and this deals with FY21, which of course was done on June 30th, it was the last day of FY21. June 30th was also the day we got our first half of the ARPA funds. So since we received the funds that day and they were deposited that day, then we have to go back and amend our budget for FY21 because we're showing almost $1.5 million of income that we didn't have budgeted. While we're there, there were a few additional things that did not make it late in the year. One was a donation for $25,000 that we did late in the year to the chamber. Going down a little farther, under the harbor, we had a typo that we discovered. We had inserted $100,000 for harbor rents when it should have been $110,000. And while we were there, we do not have to amend the budget because of differences in revenues, only differences in expenses, only increased expenses. So, but while we're there for the $10,000 that we are correcting, we went ahead and put the actual numbers in for harbor rents. And as you know, we did not collect harbor rents in 2021. We told them we were deferring to 2022 so we could start doing it in July. So the decreased number you see there, the 44,593, was actual rents that we collected in 21 instead of up near what the revenue should be, which is $110,000. So this budget amendment reflects that. Moving on down, we decided to purchase a trolley late in the year, and that wasn't in the budget either, so we're throwing that in here as well. Basically just house cleaning items, and we would like to get this recommended to the council. We'll go to the council and ask them to approve it. We'll do everything we're supposed to do, advertise it, do the hearing and everything, and get it officially done. And we'll be done with FY '21. Not ideal to do it after the fact, but not illegal as well.
You need a motion for that?
Yeah, we need a motion on that.
Yes, ma'am.
I make a motion, we, move on with that budget amendment.
I'll second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Now, moving on to number 8. Arthur, I'll give you one more shot. Back at you.
Nothing's come
still.
up between
Nothing.
now and then. I'm
All right,
good.
give you a little bit of time, Denise.
I'm good,
You're good?
thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, yes, sir.
could I get a clarification through Manager Talbert? Are we clear to move forward with this plan now? Are we,
Yes, you were clear once the council said yes to it. This was just purely to inform the Budget Personnel Committee what the costs were
oh,
involved.
okay, just wanted to be clear. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir, you're good.
The only comment I have is that, and I've been talking a little bit with Mike about this, you know, as we are adjusting our salaries to match market in all our departments is what we're seem to be doing now. We do have to keep in mind our revenue from a standpoint, I think, of our tax revenue, our fixed revenue. So, you know, it's the thing we don't like to talk about, but we don't want to get into the situation that I've been warning about of where you're basing these salaries on the variable revenue that we have. So we've got to, and I think, Mike, you're tasked now with, I think you're on board with this, watching that closely as we discuss this with the upcoming budget talks going into '22, because we need to make sure that we're not shifting too much of our labor on the variable revenue or taking the revenue away from the capital projects and capital expenses and so forth. So that's something we need to really keep in mind. You know, I don't like to raise taxes, but I know it hasn't been they have not been raised in a while. But if we're continue to raise the salaries and the benefits, we've got to do something. Or we're just robbing Peter to pay Paul, basically, on that deal, as far as capital investment. So that's my only comment at this point. So something for thought down the road.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We're done.